My name's Pete Smith. I'm the Regional Chair for Oceania, and I'd like to welcome you to the first of our CEM Oceania Network webinar series. As customary, even though this is across Oceania, as customary for those of us in Australia, I'm actually sitting in the country of the traditional people of the Guringai tribe. So I just quickly wanted to do an acknowledgement of country for the Guringai. So I wanted to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians across the Guringai area. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and I would like to also pay my respects to First Peoples from any of the nations across the Oceania region. And so I'd like to then move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so look, basically just some quick housekeeping. There's going to be 60 minutes of presentations. There'll be a 20-minute Q&A. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A function. You'll find that at the bottom of your screen. So don't use the chat function. If you do have a question, use the Q&A. We will get all the slides out to you later on via an email, and the recordings will be available. So next slide, please. Okay. The Q&A will be a facilitated discussion. So as I said, directly and the questions directly into the Q&A, not the chat. And make sure that we have a constructive conversation. So everybody's ideas and points of view are valid. And in particular, we want people to ask questions about how they could use this standard, how they could use this work in their own work. So please, can we go to the next slide? Okay, just a quick backup of what the CEM Oceania Network is. So it's a group of people that's been meeting on an ad hoc basis since about 2017. They're from across the CEM Oceania region. There's people from the Solomon Islands, Fiji, Australia, and New Zealand. And what they've been trying to do is assist me as the regional chair to look at networking across the Oceania region. This now is what we're considering, this process of these webinars is what we're looking at as one of the major focus of how we can look at trying to interact and feed back to local members. So the idea is we want to canvass ideas for funding and collaborative projects. We also want to provide an Oceania focus and contact point to each of the thematic groups and other IUCN commissions. But the key aspect of the CEM ONG is to actually try and look at networking across Oceania region. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, there's the members. I won't go through all of that, but they basically cover Australia, New Zealand, and Cook Islands, Fiji, and Solomon Islands. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so today, actually what we're now doing is we're launching, today is the first of the CEM theme topics. And the first of these ones is a collaboration between us, CEM ONG, the regional IUCN office, and the nature-based solutions thematic group from IUCN. So the speakers today, we're very fortunate to have Angela Andrade, the regional chair. I mean, not the regional chair, the chair of CEM, and she has had a heavy involvement in nature-based solutions. We're also looking at, from Emmanuel, we're looking at who will be providing, she's the thematic lead for the IUCN NbS standard, and she'll be giving us a detailed outline of the standards. We have Andrew Foran, who's from the regional office in the Pacific, and they're looking at how the IUCN regional office is trying to implement the standards into their activities. Then we have 3 case studies. We have Fred Patterson from SPREP in the Solomon Islands, and he'll be looking at how, if we can look at past projects, how well did those past projects that we've been involved in, that he has been involved in the South Pacific Regional Environmental Program, how they've been in terms of how they've looked at the standards. Do they address the standards? What would we do to actually improve that in future? Kelvin Passfield is looking at a particular project from the Cook Islands. Kelvin is also on the steering committee for our CEM, and Kelvin will be looking at a new project in the Cook Islands and how does that fit with the standards. And then Joe McCarter from MFAT in New Zealand, he'll be looking at how the standards, nature-based solution standards, can be applied to policy and programs for the New Zealand government in their foreign aid program. So next slide, please. Okay, and I'll pass over. So I've tried to do that very, very quickly. I'm not used to doing these at a web basis. But I'll hand over to Angela for the next slide, next presentation. Thank you.
Hello, good morning to all of you, and it's really a pleasure to be here today. And thank you very much, Peter, for the introduction, Kelvin, and all the members of the CEM team in Oceania. It's a pleasure to give a very quick overview of the process of the development of the nature-based solution standard today. So please, the next one, please. Yeah, so I will provide a general background of the nature-based solutions standard and some general information that will be, yeah, some general information. The next one, please. Yeah, so as you know, in 2016, IUCN members adopted a widely accepted definition of nature-based solutions together with a set of principles that facilitate its implementation, and gave a mandate to work on developing a standardized process on nature-based solutions. The nature-based solutions process is framed on the ecosystem approach that we all know that was adopted by the CBD in around the 2000, couple of years before. And since then, IUCN has been very much involved in the development of guidelines, scientific papers, documents, trying to mainstream the ecosystem approach to different areas of knowledge, but also specific applications as the case of ecosystem-based adaptation and mitigation. That is one of the main developments of the ecosystem approach, and all the processes started back in 2009, 2010, when the whole IUCN started the promotion of ecosystem-based approaches to climate change mitigation and adaptation under the Climate Change Convention. There have been also some important developments on the implementation of nature-based solutions for protected areas. And what we are presenting here, and the full standard, is built. These are the building blocks of the standard. We are not developing something new. It's something that is more a kind of a proactive approach to solve some big societal challenges that we have these days. Nowadays, in 2020, we were supposed to have the super year. That means that we were all expecting the year of the negotiation of the new global biodiversity framework, some of the basis of the COP26, but everything, as you know, had to be delayed for next year due to the pandemics that at the end gave us an opportunity to highlight the relevance of including human health and ecosystem management as one of the main challenges of nature-based solutions. IUCN, as I mentioned, adopted in 2016 the first resolution on nature-based solutions that includes the definition and the principles, and Emmanuel will be presenting that. And recently, the IUCN members adopted a new resolution that was voted recently and is already in place since the beginning of November. The next one, please. So currently we are facing, we all know that we are facing a planetary emergency for climate, biodiversity loss, ecosystem degradation, human health, among others. And unsustainable human activities from farming and mining to industry and infrastructure are really undermining the productivity of vast areas of farmland forests and other type of ecosystems. So all these big challenges are really threatening the food security, the water supplies, and the biodiversity that we have. And according to the Climate Change Convention and the latest developments of the IPCC, we know that we only have 10 years left to bend the curve on climate change and halt biodiversity loss before these impacts on human beings become more dramatic. We are already facing these big challenges these days. But now this nature-based solution concept is being used by many organizations. We see that nature-based solutions is, for example, included in the IPBES report that is emphasizing the urgency to promote nature-based solutions as a cost-effective way of meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. Perhaps under the IPBES is more focused these days on urban environments, but at the end, nature-based solutions is there. It's also one of the pillars of the UN Climate Summit and the Nature-Based Solutions for Climate Manifesto that was adopted at the end of last year. There is also an increased recognition of nature-based solutions in the Global Biodiversity Framework between 2021, 2030, and this is something that we are expecting really to be included in the new framework and will be adopted in the COP15. We have seen also the importance of scaling up the incorporation of nature-based solutions into all countries' NDCs. Many countries are already submitting the new or the updated NDCs and providing long-term strategies and adaptation plans under the framework of the COP26. It's also one of the pillars of the decade of ecosystem restoration that is also starting next year. We also found that the nature-based solutions is one of the pillars of the Global Future Council that was promoted by the World Economic Forum and is supporting, the objective is to support finance and action to enable a nature-positive economy. And as I mentioned before, there is already the IUCN resolution adopted a month ago. Next one, please. So the relevance of having this standard at this point is becoming extremely important because we have seen in the different political presentations and literature that there are a lot of references on nature-based solutions, but it's getting more and more important to make sure that there is a common understanding and interpretation of the concept, and also across sectors, users, and geographies. We were requested to have a document or a proposal that is easy to be understood by different sectors and communities and different people. So this is one of the main purposes of this standard. Also to guarantee that is a good, systematic learning framework in a way that lessons can improve and evolve the application. So it's a learning by doing a proposal to the application of the standard. It's also aimed to provide a quality control in the design and execution of interventions. As I mentioned before, is using existing relevant tools, approaches, and methods. It's also aiming to minimize risks related to further unsustainable use of nature. It's also a tool to contribute to sustainability. Is also aiming to create a global user community across different sectors that helps guide implementation on the ground, and also engage really the policy sector in the whole process. And last but not least, contribute to a shared vision for a just and sustainable world. Next, please. So the standard, in general terms, the purpose is to set up a common basis of understanding of nature-based solution, as I mentioned before, also to contribute to the transformational change that is is key to address the next big challenges, and also include a broader audience, including donors, investors, and others. Next, please. These are the three main products that we have. So you have, and you can check all of them on the IUCN website, the document, the guidelines, and a self-assessment tool for the implementation. Next one, please. And finally, we have the governance structure that is being proposed for the implementation of nature-based solutions. So I want to highlight that our commission in the coming future will be mainly focused on the area of science and knowledge committee. We will be leading that committee. So all the views on that are also very welcome. And of course, we will be involved in the user groups, the regional hubs, and there will be an international standard committee that aims to oversight and safeguard the revision of the standard. Next, please. Yeah, and finally, you see, I already mentioned that these are the topics of the IUCN resolution, and number 2 is where we will be focused in the coming intersessional period. So this is, I will give the floor to Emmanuel that will continue with the presentation of the standard. Thank you very much.
Next, please. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to have to be part of this regional event, and I congratulate you on doing on initiating that series of webinars and focusing this one on nature-based solutions. So I'm very happy to share with you some of the work that IUCN and CEM has done in the past few years on nature-based solutions. Next, please. So Angela provided an overview on the international policy and the link between NbS and the international policy, and provided a general overview on the standard. I would like to, since I understand that some of the audience may not be aware of NbS, I would just like to go back to the definition and refer to the original work that we've done, and that has served a lot as the basis for developing the global standard on nature-based solutions. Next, please. So as Angela mentioned, in 2016, we had the resolution 69 that was adopted by the IUCN community and defined nature-based solutions as different actions that either through protection, sustainable management, or restoration of different types of ecosystems, whether they are natural or whether they are managed, address global societal challenges while they ensure both benefits to humans and nature. So it's really imperative for nature-based solutions to provide benefits both to humans as well as biodiversity, and as it has already been mentioned by Angela before, to address one or several societal challenges. And the ones that we identified, I would say, as the most important, more urgent one to address at the moment were climate change through adaptation and mitigation, natural disaster, social and economic development, human health, food security, water security, ecosystem degradation, and biodiversity loss. Next, please. In addition to the NbS definition, in 2016, we also had a list of 8 different principles that were supposed to help frame better and define better what we meant by NbS, nature-based solutions, or NbS. And these principles are supposed to be taken into consideration in conjunction with the NbS definition. So just to mention a few, the first one, 5 minutes? I have 10 minutes, no? Peter, I think. Oh. Okay, well, there are 8 principles. The first one is on embracing nature conservation. Okay, so NbS are not there to replace nature conservation, but more to be complemented or complementing nature-based solutions. Principles number 2 is more about synergies with other types of solutions like engineering and so on. Principle number 6, for instance, is on the importance of implementing nature-based solutions and designing them at a broad landscape. The last one it's really important to have NbS integrated in as part of the overall design of policy and regulation and so on. Next, please. Next, please. So it was easy for us, or we found it useful to consider NbS as an umbrella type concept. It incorporated different types of well-based, ecosystem-based or ecosystem-related approaches, such as EBA, ecosystem-based mitigation, eco-DRR, and so on, green infrastructure, and so on. Next, please. In addition to that definition, we did some further work on the principles. Next, please. Just to ensure to better understand whether NbS could really serve well as an umbrella type concept for different types of ecosystem-based or ecosystem-related approaches. And we wanted to understand if there were some gaps in the NbS framework definition or list of principles that I've just rapidly mentioned, because we use this as a basis for the foundation as or building the global standard on nature-based solutions. And this is a work that we did in collaboration with a lot of people at CEM and IUCN. Next, please. And what we did was comparing the different principles, so the 8 principles of NbS with principles in other existing frameworks. And what we found out was, first of all, that there are 3 principles. The one on synergy that I've mentioned, the one, so synergy was different types of interventions such as engineering and so on. The one on landscape scale, so ensuring that we're implementing and designing NbS at the largest scale, and the one on successfully or ensuring that we're upscaling NbS into policy, into regulations to have a long-term NbS. So these 3 principles were really unique to NbS, were really outstanding with regards to NbS. And in addition, we found out that there are a few issues or a few terms that were missing or that were not sufficiently emphasized in the NbS principles. And they included adaptive management, adaptive governance, effectiveness, uncertainty, multi-stakeholder participation, and temporal scale and long-term stability. Next, please. So it was really important to identify this at that point. And this is just to illustrate the link between that definition and the list of principles with the global standard that has 8 different criteria on your right side. Next, please. So those 8 criteria are all interlinked. These are the 8 criteria in the global standard for nature-based solutions. They each have 2, 3, 4 different indicators. There's 28 indicators in total. And there are all these different criteria are really interlinked, interconnected. There's one on societal challenges. You can go next, please, because I need to run. So the first one is on effectively addressing societal challenges. So ensuring that the stakeholders are aware and identifying and agreeing on one or several societal challenges that needs to be addressed with the NbS intervention. That those societal challenges are clearly understood. I would just say one thing here. If the societal challenge, as we said, one of the societal challenges biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation. So if this is the one that is targeted, in order to have it different, the NbS differentiated from a classical, more classical nature conservation intervention, then it has to be in addition to another societal challenge. Next, please. Next, please. So this criteria number 2 is on complementarity and on synergies. So synergies across sectors, 6 synergies across stakeholders, synergies. Thank you, Peter. Synergies across different ecosystems. And it's really important to design and when you design the NbS, again, to take into account the broader landscape scale or seascape scale, and to identify the risk, again, beyond the intervention side. So I want to go here into detail, but just to illustrate here on the right side, you can see one NbS that is incorporated different types of sectors, different types of NbS, which is, for instance, the mangrove restoration, wetlands restoration, forest landscape restoration, green infrastructure. There is a wall also that is being protecting on flood coming from inland and from the sea. Next, please. The third one is to ensure that each NbS, as I said in the beginning, we need to ensure that there are benefits for humans and for biodiversity. So NbS needs to result in a net gain to biodiversity and in ecosystem integrity. And this needs to be done through the identification of clear biodiversity outcomes, of regular monitoring and assessment in order to ensure that there are not a certain consequence or certain degradation that are happening during the process, and so on. Next, please. The fourth one is on ensuring that the NbS intervention is economically viable. Next, please. The next one is on ensuring that the NbS is based on an inclusive process. It's a transparent process. There are multi-stakeholders. There are a lot of different stakeholders and sectors that are incorporated and taken into account in the development and in the implementation of the NbS. So this is just to ensure that there is a transparent and empowering governance process. Next, please. The sixth one is on balancing trade-offs between different. Well, I would just continue because I need to wrap up. So next, please, to balancing trade-offs. The next one is on managing. The criteria number 7 is on adaptive management. The criteria number 8, next, please, is on again, the need to upscale the intervention, whether in policy and regulation and so on. So next one, please. So there are 8 different criteria and there are 8 different criteria, and there are 28 indicators that you can find in those documents. And as Angela said, there are 2 different documents. There is a guidance that is providing more detail on how to understand the standard. That first document that is more concise, I would say. And then the third part that is currently being tested at the moment, you have here the link if you want to test it yourself, is a self-assessment that can help you understand and assess and plan and design and implement an NbS and understand where you stand with regards to each of the different criteria and each of the different indicators. Next, please. Okay, so these are all the references you can find. Next, please. You can find everything on the CEM website and IUCN website. Please contact me if anything wasn't clear, if you would like to get any information more in detail, or if you would like to join the user group. Thank you, and I'm sorry I had to run so much.
Well, colleagues from Fiji, my name's Andrew Foran. I'm the Regional Program Coordinator here at IUCN Oceania. We're the Secretariat side of the IUCN House here. Look, a big thank you to CEM for organising this, and a welcome from Mason Smith, the Regional Director, and all of our team here. Next slide, thanks. So I'm just going to give a quick rundown today on some of the work we're doing that connects in and is interlinked with nature-based solutions, and then just a couple of thoughts and I guess around what we've been looking at, some key areas perhaps for discussion for later on. Next slide, please. So just a very quick background. We've got about 40 odd plus staff here in Suva. We work right across Oceania. Our project works generally in Pacific Islands. We've got some liaison officers in a number of countries there. And look, we've been doing some fantastic work here in the region, working with CEM and the other commissions and our members here since 2007. Next slide, please. We'll go to the next slide. So we're going to look at the, I'm going to give you a quick snapshot. I'm not going to go into detail, but just to give you a snapshot of some of the work we're doing. Marine is obviously a key focus for us here. We've got a fantastic team under Hans Wendt, who's been doing a great lot of support, both technical and financing support, to governments around the region, around that integrated ocean governance, helping with their policies, all sorts of work on that. So some key areas there that overlap with nature-based solutions, which I guess, you know, just to, if we're framing it, it's really that first part of the definition, which is protecting, sustainably managing and restoring our ecosystems is the heartland of that. So throughout all of the work we do, we tend to have an element of those. Next slide, please. Climate change, again, a key area here. We do a bit of work around plastics. We've been doing some energy and gender work recently, but what I really wanted to highlight was our energy ecosystems and sustainable livelihoods initiative. That's been running for well over a decade now, doing some fantastic work, you know, both at national, but all the way down to community levels in policy support, capacity building, and providing grants there as well. So some great stuff going on there. Next slide, please. And protected areas, obviously an IUCN heartland, and obviously a key part of nature-based solutions as well. Our flagship program is BioPalma. I won't go into detail, but we've got a fantastic grants facility with that, an action component. So check the website there. There's a couple of open grant calls right now, which I'll just do a bit of SPREP there. But look, there's also a whole lot of other work and capacity building work goes on with that. We work with SPREP, for example, on the PIPAP resource hub as well. We've been doing a range of work across the region with Fiji. We've got 2 GEF6 projects that are coming up. Probably going to be turning the keys on those to start the engines in the first quarter next year in Solomon Islands, a little bit later in Vanuatu. And we're also in the midst of discussions with Kiribati on their GEF7, and there'll be a big protected areas element around that, but not just on that. Next slide, please. The Species and Ecosystems program, we've got the Critical Ecosystems Partnership Fund. That's also been doing some fantastic work over the last 8 years. We hope we'll move beyond 2021 for a second phase of that. But it's been doing some great work with communities throughout the East Melanesia space. So that's been fantastic. Red List of Ecosystems. We've been doing a lot of work with countries around that, providing assessments. Tonga's been one of the countries leading the way there with Fiji and others. Next slide, please. Species and ecosystem. This is an upcoming one. I think watch this space. We've got a GCF program working with SPREP on coastal marine ecosystem resilience. Melanesia is going to be starting the ball rolling there. We've got the consultants are working with us right now on that. We'll be following with Micronesia and Polynesia to follow in parallel. And basically there, SPREP's looking after the sort of looking at the assessments and the national priorities and governance, and IUCN's looking after the Blue Impact facility, which will be grants and other financing mechanisms. So pretty exciting on that one. Next slide, please. The BioDiv program is a global one. We've just kicked that off this year. It's only in Fiji, but we're hoping to expand that more into the region. Really looking at that, a range of work with countries with their CBD process and their NbSAPs, but looking at that global biodiversity target. You know, how can we put that together? A la, you know, the international climate targets, the 1.5, 2 degrees sort of target. So really look at that apex target for biodiversity. Next slide, please. We do a lot of work in environmental governance, especially around environmental law. We've got a great program here. Some natural resource economics work we've been doing over the years, a couple of examples there. Just wanted to highlight that next year around June, July will be the inaugural Oceania Environmental Law Conference. So we're really excited about that. Watch this space. There'll be more information coming on that one. Next slide, please. Water and wetlands. I'll just touch on a couple of things there. With the Global Mangroves Alliance and the Pacific Mangroves Initiative, aware
Can everyone hear me? I think we lost Andrew. Okay, unfortunately, we lost Andrew, so I'm just going to go through my presentation now. My name is Fred Patterson. I work for the Secretary of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. The presentation I will be doing will be on a project that we were implementing previously in Fiji, the Solomons and Vanuatu. And so I will I will just go through the process that we went through to give us some context on what the project is doing, and hopefully you can reflect on the global standards for nature-based solution as we go through based on the previous presentation. So basically my presentation will be a case study. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'll touch a bit on the project and then on the methodology and the ecosystem-based adaptation options that we developed, and then the implementation, and then reflect on the IUCN NbS standards as well, and some lessons learned. Next. The project is a five-year project implemented in Fiji, Solomons, and Vanuatu. And in the Solomons, the presentation will focus on Honiara, where Guadalcanal provinces. Next. The broad outcome is basically to promote ecosystem-based adaptation in planning and policy processes for the 3 countries. Next. And we took almost like a 4-phased approach. So we have the baseline assessment, we call the ecosystem socioeconomic resilience analysis and mapping. Based on those, we developed some ecosystem-based adaptation options, and then we have implementation and integration. So just for the information, the project is already completed as of July this year. Next. We'll skip this slide. Next. During most of the time, we try to reflect on what ecosystem-based adaptation is. Basically, if you have more sustainable, resilient ecosystems, then in turn you have more resilient communities. Next. I think many of you would be familiar with the concept, so I'm just going to rush through them. So this is an example of the kind of concept we promote. Next. To distinguish between ecosystem-based adaptation and that without adaptation. That is focus on ecosystems. Next. So in our baseline assessment, we went through a number of steps. So we identified the ecosystems. Next, through some consultation process. And then we did some spatial mapping of the ecosystem and services. Next. Next slide, please. And this map shows you how we map the distribution of ecosystems and the different values using spatial images. Next. So these are just examples. This is for Guadalcanal where we are working. Next, please. Next. And this is for, and then step 3 in the process is we did some economic evaluation of the ecosystems based on some of the previous data or work that has been done before, looking at the value of each ecosystem services. For example, in this case, look at the kind of services that they get from the ecosystem: firewood, building materials, fishing, all those kinds of information. Next. Because our project is a climate change project, we also did a climate change assessment, so that is also part of the process. Next. And yep, next, we did some vulnerability assessment. Next. And then some climate projections for the Solomon as a result of the assessment. Next. And look at where the ecosystems come from based on the assessment. So next. And link that to the climate change impacts. Next. And also look at the bigger picture in terms of the broader impacts of climate change. Next. And so we produce these reports. We call them the ecosystem resilience analysis and mapping. So these reports are available on the SPREP website. Next. And then we went through another process for ecosystem-based adaptation options development. So we went through a number of processes, which I will go. Next slide, please. Focusing on the key ecosystem services. Next. So our focus is on terrestrial watersheds. Next. Freshwater ecosystems. Next. Urban environment. Next. And the coastal and marine ecosystems. So those are the focused priority options that came out. Next. So out of that process, we also produced what we call the ecosystem-based adaptation master plans. We did it for Wagina, for Honiara. Next. And for each of the master plans, we did some specific prioritizations to decide what we will do. So we did a prioritized EBA absorption based on a number of criteria, which is there. Next. And then next, please. And then we did a cost-effective analysis to identify exactly what we need to do. So we have two implementation projects that came out of this process. Go up further, please. Further up, you right ahead now. Yeah, so we did our first option is for the Barana Nature and Heritage Park. And our second option is the Botanical Gardens one. And there's a number of activities that we did in terms of ecosystem-based adaptation activities, which we've done. Can we go to the next slide? And based on the global nature-based solutions, standard nature-based solution, we reflect that most of the criteria are met in the process. So I think what I wanted to showcase in this presentation was to reflect on the process. The process actually informed some of the achieving the standards that we are presenting in this case. Next. Some of the key lessons learned for this project is that the indicators can be long-term in terms of ecosystems, but you can also, for project, can be activity-based. You need a lot of different experts. It is important to utilize existing mechanisms. And also, you also in the process achieve some of the biodiversity outcomes. Next. And also in terms of climate change, building resilience is an ongoing process. And also it is important to work in partnerships and we work with the government in terms of sustainability. A lot of our projects have very specific timeframes. And so you want to utilize government partnership and also local expertise in different sectors because you are approaching from a broader level. Next. I think the next, since our project is already completed, I think the next thing to think about is to try and monitor and report against the global NbS standards and some of the criteria and indicators. There seem to be a strong linkages to the project that we did and the standards. And we are not able to go to the slide, but we have produced a number of implementation and management and business plans that should be able to inform us about how we are able to achieve some of the NbS standards and criteria and also the indicators. So, thank you very much. If you have any questions, I think this is the, you can send me an email or the commission that we are all part of to be able to provide you some. But some of the reports that we produce are on the SPREP website as well. So please feel free to visit the SPREP website. Thank you very much.
Yeah, hello everyone, can you hear me? Okay, let's go on to the first slide then. I'm Kelvin Passfield, I'm based in the Cook Islands and I am the steering committee member for the Oceania region on the CEM steering committee. And this is a case study of what we hope are a nature-based solution from the Cook Islands. So next slide, please. Okay, you've already seen this this slide, and I'm not sure we've got the right presentation up now that I see this one, but I just thought we'd include this one because as it says, it's actions to protect, manage and restore natural or modified ecosystems. And I am, in this particular case study, we're talking about a modified ecosystem, in fact. So next slide, please. So first of all, we've got some examples from some commonly used erosion control methods in the Cooks. Next slide, please. So there, at the top left there, you've got concrete seawall. The top right, you've got a rock revetment wall. The bottom right, you've got a rock revetment wall. Again, you know, with a better picture of the asset which it's protecting. And the bottom left, there's a locally designed concrete coastal protection system called a CPU, Coastal Protection Unit, which are designed to let the water go through the slats, but you accumulate sand behind so you don't cause erosion, but still protect the assets. Next slide, please. So our project was in Avana Harbour. It's a small fishing harbour. It's quite important traditionally. It's where the 7 canoes were supposed to have left from the Cook Islands to populate New Zealand back, who knows, 800, 900 years ago perhaps. Well, this is where they all took off from. So you'll see on the left, there's a degraded, eroded part of coastline. This coastline was actually reclaimed during or for the 1992 Festival of Pacific Arts for the arrival of some voyaging canoes and whatever that were a part of that Festival of Pacific Arts in 92. It was reclaimed, and then later on, if you look at the right, about 5 years ago, on the right side picture, you'll see a little jetty going out on the other side of this reclaimed area that was built by Japanese funding from the Japan Small Grants funding. And during that process, they also put the leftover fill material, which they'd used to bund the water out of the jetty side while they were building it to keep it dry. Then they used all the bags of fill that were the bund. They just used them and placed them along the coast there to help protect the coastline. And that was the material was a synthetic material, commonly in like rice bags, fertilizer bags, etc. It breaks down very quickly in the elements and would have been putting microplastics in large numbers out into the ocean ecosystem. Next slide, please. Okay, so the project started with dredging out the area where the fishermen used for an anchorage to give them a deeper anchorage, and at the same time provide sand to fill the sandbags that we were going to use. Next slide, please. The material was then carted off on in trucks to the contractor's site, where it was screened for to get the rocks out. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, and yeah, here on the right-hand side picture, you can see the rocks that were screened out of that sand. And then on the left-hand side, you can see the the geotextile, the geotextile sandbags getting filled through a hopper that was being used. Okay, the filled sandbags were then brought back to the site. These are 0.75 cubic meter geotextile bags holding approximately 1 ton when they're full of sand. Next slide, please. So the bags were then placed using a big digger and a harness. The bags were placed along that area of eroded land after it was also, first of all, it was profiled into a bit of a slope to suit the desired slope, and then the bags were positioned in place. A lot of work for the contractor. Stuff he's never done before, so it was a learning curve for him. Next slide, please. Yeah, there's just a view from out, showing it's always a 45-meter stretch that we were protecting. So small scale, but the Cook Islands is a small country, so in relative terms, it's quite large. Next, please. Following the completion of the laying of the sandbags, we did foreshore planting. So the first stage on the left there was beach pea, like Vigna species, beach pea vines. Then behind them, we planted a row of vetiver grass very close together. Vetiver is very good for erosion control. You've probably mostly all come across that before, with very good root system. Then behind that, we planted some native trees. We planted tamanu, which is a calophyllum. We planted miro, which is a thespecia, and to'u, which is a cordia subcordata, and also coconut trees were planted along there. The picture on the right was where we tried to involve landowners as much as possible in the project, and also fishermen. And so we got them to help us to plant the foreshore vegetation. Next slide, please. So this is the assessment, the 8 criteria, as we mentioned. I had a bit of an attempt to fill it out based on the components of our project, and I personally think we could call it a nature-based solution, or at least a hybrid solution, where you've got some man-made material, the geotextile sandbags, but it's using the natural material from the site, which is the sand. It's also planting vegetation along, so it's improving biodiversity, and it's using nature as an erosion control method. Next slide, please. Okay, I think I actually uploaded a different slide presentation to this one. There's another slide that goes in here, which was the thank you slide to the funders, which was the small grant program, a global grant project that was funded from Australian aid, actually. It was a part of a project for us, which involved 3 countries. So this was an erosion control project in the Cook Islands. We did a project in Niue on organic farming and soil improvement for their vanilla industry, and we also did a project in Tokelau on water stations, drinking water for the public. So yeah, that's me done. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, kia ora koutou, colleagues. I trust everyone can hear me. Great. Well, my name's Joe Makata. I'm a senior advisor in the Climate Change and Environment team and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in New Zealand. And it's thank you very much to all the CEM members for giving me the chance to have a little bit of a ramble on this topic. And it's really exciting to see all the work that's underway and hear a lot of the thinking that's gone in behind that. Look, I was asked to give a brief overview, I guess, of how the nature-based solution standards intersect with policy and pilots type work. And I guess from my position, I'm reflecting on, I've been in the process of designing up a range of programming in the last 2 to 3 years that's looking to give effect to New Zealand's climate change commitments in the Pacific. These programs are being implemented across a range of sectors and areas, including water security, information for decision making. But a really, I guess, central one for us is around looking to support resilient ecosystems and the resilience of the communities that depend on those ecosystems. As we know in the Pacific, ecosystem services are absolutely critical, really underpin development gains across the board. And so we are working on a couple of different pieces of work that will really focus in on maintaining those ecosystem services. One of the pieces that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago at the Pacific Nature Conservation Conference was is a piece of work around managing invasive species for climate change adaptation, which will look to really, I guess, try and address issues of food security and disaster risk reduction related to invasive plant and animal species, along with colleagues at SPREP and at Department of Conservation and Manaki Land Care Research in New Zealand. And throughout our work, we are trying to thread things through, like looking to payment for ecosystem service models, recognizing the value of Indigenous knowledge and practice for driving adaptation in the Pacific, looking to align and harmonize with the range of existing programming underway, of which there is a huge amount in the Pacific. All of that should indicate that there's a really high alignment with the standards, and look, it's incredibly helpful to see how thought through they are, and I think the criteria that have been identified in the documentation are really useful to people like us, essentially people who are looking to design up and incorporate a range of sectors into our broader resilience work. So, I mean, I think it's safe to say we're pleased to see this conversation developing, and we do see the standards as that they will have a key role to play, I think, in driving these kind of interventions over the next little while. And look, I have a couple of observations really, I guess, on my experience of trying to apply the standards. These are really personal observations rather than any considered policy. I'm not a decision maker in any great sense, but have been trying to design up this work. And look, the first is that I do standards themselves and the guidance that is now being produced around them really do add to the conversation around mainstreaming biodiversity and climate change adaptation across sectors. You know, our holy grail is to try and match up all of these different strategic drivers we have, whether they are the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris targets, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction at a global level, and then the regional framework for resilient development in the Pacific, and all the other regional strategies and frameworks. And I think nature-based solutions and the thought that's gone into documenting them really do allow that ability to speak across sectors. So when I'm talking to my colleagues in infrastructure departments or agriculture, I can start to be discussing biodiversity, and I do have a framework to bring it into. I guess it's a broad tent approach to development and to conservation ecosystem service maintenance that will be really useful, I think, going forward, and the guidance as it gets increasingly specific is going to be really important. I think also absolutely critical in the COVID era, a lot of our development work in the next few years is going to be shaped by the impacts of COVID, and I think nature-based solutions and standards will allow us to build back better, or to guide building back better, and really considering long-term resilience in this work. The second observation I'd make is that I do think communication of the nature-based standards is going to be really important, and I think it's I guess reflecting on this, it's about which audience we're looking to speak to. When I'm explaining these concepts to colleagues internally within Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I need to be able to use plain English, really describe what the standards are and what they're trying to achieve, which I think is addressed, but also have a set of case studies to draw on and a whole suite of examples and context that I can use to persuade people that this is a useful approach to take. And so I think that will develop, but I think it's really important to I guess keep the communication of these concepts in mind. I think, as I've said, these are really conceptually important for development partners to think about linkages across sectors and across frameworks. I think one characteristic of the Pacific is that there's a huge amount of donor-led work underway, of like relatively limited number of people to do it. And I think it will be really important to link very clearly with the excellent work that's gone on before. Obviously, ecosystem-based adaptation and those other kinds of frameworks are inherently linked to nature-based solutions, but it will be really important to articulate how nature-based standards, nature-based solution standards build on those and broaden those efforts. And particularly if communication is to landholding communities or to stretch provincial governments, I think it will be really important to be intentional about how we communicate, I guess, some of the advances of nature-based solutions. But recognizing that perhaps that they're most useful to donor agencies and to others to allow us to really frame up complex systems issues in a comprehensive way. The third observation, I guess, is just to the people on this call, and I don't mean to tell anyone how to suck eggs, but I think, you know, context is going to be absolutely critical. The Pacific is unique in many, many ways. I think that the things that I focus on a lot are around the diversity, cultural diversity, the extent of customary land tenure, the importance of Indigenous knowledge and practice, and really those fundamental links between people and place. Not to mention the geography, the particular challenges around livelihoods. I think it will be really important to come up with a suite of guidance around nature-based solutions that really is specific to the Pacific. And in particular is closely linked with the wide variety of regional frameworks. There's a really vibrant regional architecture, obviously, in this space led by SPREP and SPC. And the IUCN. So I think it's really important to have those linkages to things like the Pacific Resilience Partnership and the various other bodies made very clear, and that there's a real space for discussion and consultation around how we broaden concepts and use, and so that they are linked to work that has already been done. So I think it really, you know, working slowly, working intentionally, working with some caution and building consensus to link to existing approaches, I think will be really critical. Look, I think that's all from me. There's been an immense amount of work going into developing these, and really congratulations to the IUCN team and to the regional office for starting to get this implementing in the Pacific. I, for one, am really excited about seeing it launch out and really start to shape how aid and development and conservation, for that matter, are undertaken in the region over the next few years. And so all the best for that, and thank you very much. I'm around for questions if that is useful. Thank you very much.
Pete, you're on mute.
Yeah, I just saw that I was on mute. Thank you, Joe. So we've Joe got right back on time. So thank you very much. Now, I might just hand over to Andrew for a minute. Was there anything specifically you wanted to mention after you dropped out? I can give you a minute or two now, just in case there was one or two things that you thought you had to get across that you missed out on.
Thanks, Pete. Look, I think the key things that I wanted to touch on were, I guess, the priority areas, a discussion around that. I put a question mark on that. I'll put both of these in the chat, so everyone please have a look at that. And also some of the opportunities and next steps that the Secretariat's working on with partners in the region from SPREP, SBC and development partners. So I'll put both of those in the chat. So please, everyone have a look at those, and they might, you know, kickstart a little bit of conversation and Q&A around that. So thanks, Pete.
Okay. Now, everybody, I don't know if the attendees had their chat function open, but there was a lot of linkages and requests for questions posed by Hamish during that. So I don't know if people had that. In terms of what I'd just like to do now is to thank all the presenters. I know it's really hard doing it in this virtual format, especially considering some of the instability of the internet across the Oceania Pacific region. I was really pleased that Fred's, because I'd worked with Fred in the past, and not Fred's problem, but internet connection in Solomons can be quite difficult. So I was very pleased that his stayed together for that length of time. Now, please, as Hamish just put out in the chat sections, we don't have a lot of questions come in yet from the Q&A process. We have a couple ourselves that we might go to, but if you do, either put something through in the Q&A or raise your hand if you specifically wanted to ask something verbally in that case, and then we can let you do that. So if I go to the some. Yep, you can raise your hand, as I said. I'll go and have a look at some of the questions that we've looked at in the past. So in terms of a question for Angela, do you know yet how many projects have used the new standard? And if so, what's their experiences been? Angela, you're muted as well. You're muted, Angela?
No. Now I'm okay. Well, the point, Pete, is that in most of the cases, and as I mentioned in my presentation, NbS is related usually, for example, with cases like EBA, for example, or like EcoDRR, or projects that are aligned with nature conservation. The idea is to realize that we are working on the right track, but the big gap in most of the cases is that not all the criteria that Emmanuel presented are met or are considered. So we notice that in many cases that people say, well, we are already doing NbS, but then the biodiversity criteria is not really complete, or is not addressed properly, or the same with economics. So I think that the point is that the self-assessment tool can be used for any initiative to check where we are and to see if it's feasible to really introduce these new criteria and make sure that the NbS standard is being implemented. But just to answer your question directly, I would say no, in the sense that it's a bit difficult to find any initiative that is really including all these criteria together. But the message is that all the criteria have to be addressed simultaneously, because that's the added value of the implementation of the standard.
Thank you. Kelvin, you had your hand raised and you're on mute. Did you have a question? And you're on mute, Kelvin.
Yeah, it was actually, I thought I'd just point out that there were a couple of questions that came into the chat box.
By the chat rather than the Q&A, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, they were directed to me. One of them was from Kenneth Kassem, asking what the material was for those bags, and it's a geotextile material. And where did we get them from? They were from a company called Geofabrics, which are based in Australia. We got them from Brisbane, but they also have offices or divisions in New Zealand. And they've actually done work, I think, in Kiribati, or they've provided larger bags in Kiribati as well. We had 0.75 cubic meter bags. The next size up is 2.5 meter bags, which are bigger than what we could really handle at the moment here, but larger projects requiring a more substantial degree of protection would go for those 2.5 cubic meter bags. And there was also a question from Fred about the cost, and a rough idea is about $1,000 per linear meter for that particular project. And that was 4 bags high by 45 meters length. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I've just got a question here that actually again for Kelvin or for Fred, and it's what elements of the NbS standard may need significant adaptation or translation so that they can be effective in the Pacific. So either Fred or Kelvin, or even Joe, if you want to have a go at that question. Now take us.
I could
Oh, Fred's on mute
probably
as well.
say, I think that they would need to be as simple or simplified as possible to try and, you know, at the moment, to assess whether your project is going to be or is a nature-based solution, looks like it's basically too much work to be bothered. I think we need to look at a simple as possible way to assess it. And I think another thing is, which I'm not too sure about, is how many of the criteria do you actually need to address to be considered. If you've got half of them, if you've got 3/4 and you fail on a couple, does that mean you're not a nature-based solution? So I think those sort of questions have to be, they may be answered already in the documents, but if so, that maybe needs to be brought out in more detail. But simple, I think we need to keep it simple.
Okay. Can I just follow up then, Kelvin, and this could be a general question to the panel. Is this concept about, do you meet all of the standards, or can you just meet some of the standards for it to be an NBS? And that's been asked a couple of times. So how many of the standards, like when does it get a pass versus a fail, if that's even an appropriate concept here? But to my way of thinking is that if you'd be needing to look at all of the elements to be an NBS, and it's not just part of them. So I'd like anyone's opinion, Emmanuel or Angela, your idea on that at the moment.
Well, I just said that. Sorry. No, I just said that it's essential to implement all the criteria and the indicators. It's not just to select the ones that are more feasible or not. The whole work that we have done is to develop an integrated proposal that deals with environmental, ecological, social, economic topics that are needed to have really a policy, because it's also for policy making, for project development, for private sector, should address all these topics. And if there are some that are not completely assessed, so then when you apply the self-assessment tool, you will notice that you need to invest more work or energy or resources in addressing one specific criteria.
Thank you. Okay, so look, we've got a couple of questions starting to come through now in terms of the Q&A. There's one from Jai Patel, and it's a question to the entire panel. And the NBS standard, as far as I can see, gives guidance criteria for designing NBS programs. So do you have any advice for developing monitoring and evaluation indicators for the implementation phase of the NBS programs? And so that might be a key question for Emmanuel. Can you see that question there from Jai Patel? And you're on mute, Emmanuel.
I don't see the question.
Okay, the question was, do you have advice for developing monitoring and evaluation indicators for the implementation phase of NBS programs?
Well, there are some in the guidance. There are for each of the criteria, there are different tools that are already proposed, whether it's monitoring tools, evaluating tools, planning tools, and so on. It is, as far as I remember, there should be something that will be alimented online and updated regularly with new tools as we're going, because again, we're more in the testing phase of the self-assessment at the moment, and it should be launched in about, I believe, in a couple of months, if I'm correct. So I don't know if that helps, but I mean, in the guidance, you were in the first document that Angela mentioned. There are a few examples with a few examples of specific tools that you can already use for certain criteria, certain indicator to assess some of the indicators. In the guidance, you have much more guidance. You have much more detailed information on different tools that are existing. And if I'm correct, there will be some updated information as we go online.
Okay, thanks very much. Jai, if you have any follow-up with that, please put them through, but hopefully that deals with your question. There was another one from an anonymous attendee about, is your primary focus the Pacific Islands, and will you be looking to assist Torres Strait Islands in Australia? Our focus isn't the Pacific Islands. The standard is a global standard. Australia is part of the Oceania region for IUCN, which does have a Pacific Island focus as well. But the vast majority of members of CEM are from Australia. And a simple answer to that question is yes, we would be very happy to assist people in the Torres Strait Island looking at the NbS standards. And I'm sure the regional office would be interested in that as well, Andrew. And you're on mute, Andrew.
Yep, that's correct. Absolutely. We'd work with our colleagues at the Australian Committee for IUCN as well on that.
Yeah, so whoever asked that question, yes, we're very interested in looking at how this could be used to assist in programs in Torres Strait Island or anywhere within Australia or Oceania. But from Angela and Emmanuel's position, they have a global focus for this work. Okay, so I'll go back to any other.
Yeah, I could just add something,
Yes.
and it's also related to, I think there was one question about like adapting the global standards so that it fits better the regional context. As part of the governance structure, there are some national and regional offices that are supposed to be instrumental in adapting the global standard to the national or to the regional context, whether it's political context, ecosystem type, different types of societal challenges that need to be addressed, the type of community and culture that are involved in the region or in the nation. So, well, I would suppose, maybe you know, Angela, I would suppose that the IUCN office, regional office in Oceania should have some kind of, or would probably provide in the future some kind of capacity building and some kind of facilitating process to help you adapt the global standard in the regional context of Oceania.
Yeah, I think that is important to keep in mind that this is, let's say, a learning tool as well, no? So we have to use it, keeping that in mind, that anytime it can be, we are learning from the experience, and the standard it's supposed to be updated at least every 4 years. That's part of in the same way that it happens with the red list of ecosystems or the green list of protected areas. So the idea is to capture experiences from the field, and also the standard could be adapted to the regional circumstances, as Emmanuel indicated. That's the reason of having these regional hubs, no, in which, depending on the context, there might be possibilities to adapt or adjust some criteria, but this is part of the process of implementation, no? So this is what we have at the moment, and in the future, the standard could be, as we explain in here, so far it's a self-assessment tool, but in the future could be assessed by a third-party authority. And the idea, or ideal, could be to get a standard officially given to a project or to an initiative to make sure that they are really implementing the full standard. But perhaps that would take some more years of learning and implementation.
Thank you. Okay, so I've got a question now, which is really related at the 3 case study presenters. And it's about, after you've gone through the process for this, I want you to think about, so in terms of Fred, there are projects that have gone in the past. For Joe, you're looking at developing projects, and Kelvin, you're in the middle of a project. Did this exercise you've just done, or Joe, you've been doing this before, in Fred's case, would the implementing the standard have changed the projects he was looking at? For Kelvin, how has it influenced your thinking while you're developing the project? And for Joe, how is it? I know that was your point of your presentation, but I'm going back to it again. How do you think this fits into looking at designing projects in the future? So if I could start with, say, Joe first.
Sure, thanks for the question. Look, like I said, it's useful to have a guide, and whether or not we are assessing our projects against a standard, or whether or not it's a helpful sort of set of criteria that we can look against to say, look, this is being thought through, this is what a good project would look like. It does give you that. I think, so the short answer is it will be useful, and I would certainly, I mean, certainly from my corner of the agency, I think it's a useful frame of reference to start thinking about what the linkages between climate change adaptation, biodiversity loss mitigation, disaster risk reduction, what they all are. I guess for me, it does hinge a little on the ability that we're able to develop an Oceania specific or a Pacific specific idea of what that is. I think I'm quite, many people are quite wary of checklists, in terms of having things that we have to assess a set of projects against. And I think having a suite of examples and particularly that articulation of how it links with the really wide range. I mean, the PBAC program that Fred outlined has been really kind of region leading in terms of defining what EBA looks like in the Pacific context. And so I guess articulating some of those linkages and building that kind of understanding of what it looks like in the Pacific context, I think will be really important. So I think at the moment it's an important guide, but I think really getting that body of empirical knowledge to build on to say, look, and then eventually start measuring the benefits, right? So you incorporate a nature-based solution into X infrastructure project, what then happened? And the indicators that Jai mentioned in terms of developing those really good implementation-focused indicators. So it's a longer-term project, but yeah, look, it will. From my corner, it's very helpful, and I think the more that it starts to bed in, I think we'll start to see that framed across hopefully other agencies as well, and my own.
Okay, so Fred, you're on mute as well. What do you think, if you had the standards, would that have changed anything in the way you approach those projects?
I think having completed the implementation of the project, I think what Angela was saying in terms of building some level of capacity at the early phase for, especially in the project design, it would be good to start thinking about some of the indicators against the standards when you're designing the project. But from our experience, and in particular the project I worked on in the Solomons, you look at all the criteria, and all of them tick the boxes, because we have to start from scratch in terms of implementation, establishing a nature park with the climate perspective in mind, building climate resilience in mind. And so I think increasingly, the standard provides a good platform for project designers, especially those who are developing project design, to start looking at the standards and see how they can design the project with the indicators in mind in terms of the standards. But also for the Pacific context, Pete, I think you know very well that given the smallness and the size of islands and the connectivity of populations to the natural ecosystems, the standards fits in very well to building resilience to climate change, but also in terms of protecting biodiversity. But I think the challenge for some of the project is the fact that we are working in 5-year, 6-year timeframes, or maybe 4 years timeframes. But now increasingly we should be looking at the long-term timeframes in order to fulfill some of the indicators, for example. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And then that final thing to you, Kelvin, has it changed the way you would approach the project?
Well, I don't think so. And as much as I think we did the project assuming that it would be a nature-based solution,
Yeah.
But it's actually more of a hybrid solution, because I think the nature-based part of it is really the foreshore planting and protection that we're putting in. The geo sandbags, which look like the major part of the project, and they are a very important part, but they're really there in order to provide time and space for the natural vegetation to get itself established before any stormwater surge may come over the top and destroy that. So it's what I would call it a hybrid solution rather than a full nature-based solution, but a part of it is full nature-based. And I was going to work with Emmanuel at some time and go through the project and try and score it or assess it using the assessment criteria, just to put it all in place so we know. But it's more of a gut feeling that it was a nature-based solution rather than following the strict criteria of the IUCN standard.
Okay, we're getting very close to time now. I just have sort of some wrap-up questions for Manuel and Angela about the regional approach. So you've mentioned before that you'd really appreciate that if we started to look at how we could adapt the standards from a regional approach. And in reality is that that would be probably different for the continent of Australia, Australia itself and the islands. They're very different conditions, so we'd have to look at that. So what do you recommend that we look at in terms of moving forward here, in terms of looking at these standards and their application across Oceania?
Well, I would suggest, as I mentioned before, that all the criteria should be taken into account because all are relevant. Perhaps the ones that, or perhaps some elements that might be a bit, let's say, adaptable, could be some related to social or economic or even cultural components. For example, I use always the reference to the green list standard, and the green list used to be quite general for the governance component, but when we arrive to different environments, for example, Latin America, we have here a strong governance structure for indigenous people that was not considered in the general definition of the standard. So perhaps these kind of things that could be, because we have to keep in mind that the NbS as such is context dependent, no? So if we are upscaling experiences. And so this is the minimum, I would say, that is should be applicable to all over the world. But of course, there might be differences, but this should be documented and examples, criteria should be highlighted in a way that in the future we can have enough data and enough science behind this to improve the standard or to arrive to version 2 of the standard. But everything should be, as I mentioned, documented. And I know that in your region, there are a lot of potential inputs coming from the cultural practices and the governance component that perhaps should be really indicated or better documented.
Okay, thank you.
Emmanuel, perhaps you have other ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with that point on context dependency. We've mapped different case studies just to see how NbS can be implemented and can be successful in different contexts. You can see this in the 2016 publication. There are 10 different studies that are completely different from one context to another. I think that it could be maybe one of the things that would be common maybe among a lot of the cases in your region are related to flooding, related to climate change, related to the sea level. And there was something that you mentioned, Kelvin, that I didn't think about. It's that Cook Island are small. So this, even if this intervention looks small relatively, it's relatively big in your own context, which is also something that that is probably unique, you know, to your context or to an island context. So I'm thinking, you know, in the user group, there will be like users of different sectors that will be classified, or I don't know, into different sectors. So maybe there will be also users that are in similar, that have similar challenges and that are in the similar region and that have to address similar challenges, and that you could all gather and share information, and then ensure that your feedback is flowing to the Science and Knowledge Committee for adapting this and adapting the standard for for future revisions, as Angela mentioned. And as I said, I would check also at the regional level what kind of support you could get maybe on with regards to capacity building or tools that are more specific to your regional context.
Thank you. Andrew, you're on mute. You said you wanted to actually have a
yeah, just to top in, because I think this is what the bit of my presentation that dropped off when the internet went out was really about these opportunities, the next steps, and really sharing with everyone the plans that the IUCN Secretariat has for the region around that. And I guess I'll frame it under a nature-based solutions collaboration and knowledge hub, not necessarily a physical hub, but very much around that awareness, understanding, capacity development. I think that's what we've been discussing both with the agencies here, the SPREPs and the SPCs, and also the development partners as well. So very, very much, picking up on what Angela and Emmanuel was saying about the fact that it's an iterative standard. That's the nature of the beast. The context of the region is absolutely, as we go around that, it's iterative. So as we promote and raise awareness, we're also going to be listening. It's going to be coming back this way. And as Angela said, we need to capture that. But yeah, very much, I think we're beginning with this awareness phase, very much focusing on its use, as Fred was talking about, as a facilitative design tool. I think the need for its formal verification and stuff, as Angela said, is down the line a little bit anyway, but the value for that is the jury's out on that for particular players anyway. So that's, as with any formal standard, you'll get that. But look, yeah, really very much about being practical and effective in the local context is what we want to help drive. And look, for any attendees, you might need to scroll back through the chat a little. I listed out a few things there, but also noted a few priority areas. I think Kelvin popped something just in the chat just before around some thinking and discussions that we've had with a wide range of players here. And I've sort of put together a slide of what might be some key priorities areas here. We always start with the climate change, resilience and adaptation, and that is front and center. I mean, we've got, Yasa and Zazu right now this week, depending on what side of Fiji you're on, you're looking at that. So that's always front and center. But those other areas around the grey-green infrastructure, community-based management, particular sectors that we want to work with, all that stuff. So sorry, I'll leave it with that, but just sort of picking up on what Angela and Emmanuel were saying.
Okay. All right, I think that's time. I just wanted to do something that I forgot to do when I opened it up, is that we want this to be a series. So this is just the first one. We'd like to look at some other topics that would be useful and relevant to members across the region, so that we can look at these types of ideas, these global ideas and these global programs, and how we can make them fit within our own region. So please, any of the attendees, if you've got any ideas about that, we're actually thinking two types of ones we'll be looking at the moment. Is we probably, from a Pacific Islander point of view, wanted to look at a coastal and marine thematic webinar, but looking at some of those issues. And the other one that's come from one of our members is how we actually, a webinar about how we could actually get more actively involved. How do we actually get our Oceania's members excited and integrated and working on the programs that we're looking at? But I'll leave that for everyone now. And I thank the presenters, especially those who are in the wrong time zone, very, very much for their time. Thank you very much. I apologize for my little sharp messages all the time about how much time you had left, but it was a very tight schedule. And I really want to thank Guy, who's responsible for setting this up. So thank you, everyone. And hopefully I'll catch you again some other time. Goodbye.
Bye.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Very well done.
And questions are in the Q&A, as Hamish said. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.